Deut 23 and 7.
Deuteronomy chapter 23 in verse 7.
And then let me get Leviticus 19 and 33. Read.
Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land.
Yes, because you was a stranger in the Egyptians' land, so don't hate the Egyptians. Don't hate Edomites. So this is what? Is this just an assumption that the Lord making? No, this is a law. You all understand? This is a law. Why would Moses give us this law? First and foremost. Why would Moses give us this law? It's because when we came out of Egypt, we had Egyptians amongst us, right? And the Egyptians used to oppress us. So when we saw them, we were like, yo, I remember what this dude used to do to me when I was in Egypt. I'm going to do it back to them. I'm going to do the same thing they did to me to them. So I guess the Egyptians was complaining. The Lord said, tell Moses said, listen, y'all don't do that. Don't deal evil with them. Because when you was in their land, remember what they did to you. Don't do that to them. You feel what I'm saying? Okay? And why it says an Edomite? Because Moses could have seen us in the future. Moses saw us being enslaved by Edom. Moses saw the beginning and the end. So he know in the last days, he knew what Edom will do to us. Okay, so this law is also for today. You all should not be running around hating white people. You all understand? None of us should be running around hating white people. No, Leviticus 19 and 33.
Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 33. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land.
So a stranger sojourn in our land. Okay, the stranger here is talking about another nation. Came to our land and sojourned with us. Read on.
Ye shall not vex him.
We shouldn't what?
Ye shall not vex him.
Read on.
But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you.
Read on.
And thou shalt love him as thyself.
Meaning, when it says to love him as thyself, to do what? It means treat him right. Don't deal messed up with people. Don't deal evil towards people. Some of you on your job, you're dealing evil towards the person on your job because they're of another nation.
All right. Giving all praises to Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai B'Hashem HaRachakodash, and double honors to our apostles and elders here at Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the Lord, hopefully elect. Now, other than the fact that he read Deuteronomy 23 and 7 and that he said that it is a law, everything he said there was completely wrong. Now, to deal with the stranger part in Leviticus 19, I'll save that for the next lesson for the interest of time. But he's wrong on that too. We could explain this as it's explained several times over, right? But everything he said there was completely wrong. Everything. Other than the fact that, yes, Deuteronomy 23 says what it says. However, as we say time and time again, to get the understanding of the scriptures, you have to go into the language it was written in to understand the Bible overall, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. And you have to go into the words itself. You have to go into the text to get understanding of what the scriptures is talking about. And if you try to read everything for face value, meaning just in English, then you're going to be confused, which is why a lot of people actually believe that the Bible contradicts itself. But that's because they don't believe in going into the words. One of the examples say, like, thou shalt not kill. The scripture says in Exodus 20, thou shalt not kill. But then later it says that if a woman be caught lying with the beast, you shall kill them, or you shall stone, So then people will look at that and say, what is the contradiction? Well, that's why you have to go into the word. Even though in the English, in Deuteronomy 20, it says thou shalt not kill. In the actual Hebrew, the word there is ratazach. And that word means to murder. So, and then when you go to the word kill, when it says, if you found a woman lying with the beast, you shall kill her. That word there is completely different. It's harag. Harag is kill. So kill, like killing a beast, sacrificing it, or you're about to eat it. And then killing and murdering is two different things. So that's how you explain it. So you have to go there to the words to get understanding as of what it means. If you, IUIC, wants you to believe that you just have to look at everything and read it in the English, and that's how you get understanding, which is proof, even more proof, that the man of IUIC, starting with Bishop Nathaniel, has today we would say sold out. In the scriptures is referred to as taking a bribe. And really what they've done is they've went completely back to Christianity, right? As the scriptures would says, going back to your own vomit. Proverbs 26:11, as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. 2 Peter 2:22, but it happened unto them according to the true proverb, the dog is returned to his own vomit again, and the soul that was washed to wallowing in the mire. So at one point, IUIC, Bishop Nathaniel, he was clean. He woke up to the fact that he's an Israelite. He went into the Hebrew. He even called on the names. But then he took the bag. That's what we believe. He took the bribe, took away the name from the doctrine. And as the scripture says, a little leaven, leaveneth the whole lump. Eventually, he started trimming his ways. And now this doctrine changed, that doctrine changed. And now when you really examine IUIC, they just completely went back to Christianity. They took away the name from the scriptures. Don't look at the Hebrew. Now they teach a hell doctrine. That they teach that sex is a sin unless you're legally married. And you can't hate Edomites. And then typically what comes next after that is all nations can be saved. That's typically what happens when Israelite groups sell out to the powers that be and get that 501c3. In fact, I believe Tazadakia, also who's formerly known as the Godsend Comforter, did the exact same thing. He took away the Hebrew, said we can't call him Yahushua, you got to call him Jesus. They taught a hell doctrine, and then eventually all nations can be saved. That's what comes in the end, right? Which basically means you're basically saying that Christianity was always correct. That's because you're the same. But that's why you went back to the vomit. And that's what the devil does. The devil wants to compromise religious leaders, and he sends them back what? To the plantation. Black to what? To Christianity. The only difference is these guys wear purple and they have fringes on their garments. But they're no different. So they explain Deuteronomy 23:7. Okay. First and foremost, the word abhor does not mean to hate. The word abhor means to set apart, something like abominable. And that's important to know, and you'll understand why. The etymology for the word abhor, to loathe, regard with repugnance, dislike intensely. Literally to shrink back with horror or dread. So if it really means hate, it would have just simply said hate. But it means to like shun away from. And even the Lord referred to him shunning Israelites. He doesn't hate the Israelites. He hate what we become, you could say. But he doesn't hate the people or his inheritance. But he shunned them. He abhorred them, as it says. So it says, to deal with that first, it says, thou shalt not abhor. I'm going to read it for what it says. It says, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou art a stranger in his land. The Hebrew word abhor, thayab. It says to be abominable, to detest, to loathe, right? And it even tells you in Psalms 106, verse 40, it says, therefore the wrath of the Lord Yahweh was kindled against his people, insomuch he abhorred his own inheritance, meaning he shunned them like a divorce. To deal with that first. And let's deal with the Egyptian part. Yes, the reason he said not to abhor an Egyptian in our land, because before they put us in slavery, right? They knew Joseph. They knew Jacob. So at one point, everything was dwelling peacefully until what? There arose a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. And he, out of fear, he moved us to wrath. And if we had Egyptians amongst us, remember that prior, to us being in slavery, we dwelt with them in peace. They knew Joseph, etc. Right. So the point is, this entire verse here has nothing to do with Esau, Edom, and that's what we're going to show you. And the Bishop Nathaniel knows this, but that's just part of his deceptive tactics. He knows this. So first of all, I think the easiest way to explain this is to show you what is the Hebrew word for Esau in Hebrew in the Old Testament. You go to Deuteronomy 25, 30. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with the same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom. All right. So to say Edom in Hebrew, here's the Hebrew text at the top. There's the last word, right? Therefore his name was called Edom. Right there. That's what's written. Idawam. Now let me pull up the Hebrew. This is in the Syrian, right? If you look at the die, so the top right and bottom left, the die and the ra look similar. And I'm even gonna pull up some commentaries, and they're gonna even agree with you as well. Agree as well that it could be mistook. But you see the die and the ra, top left, bottom left, they look similar. All right. So Esau, Edom, as you see here at the top, Ida, Wam. Those are the characters. I, Da, Wa, Ma. Together, Ida, Wam. That's how you say Edom, or even Edomite in the Hebrew. Those four characters. Okay? And then if we go to how to say it in the plural, to say it in the plural, you would add the yum at the end. (25:14). We're gonna come back to this one here, but it says 2 Chronicles 25:14. Amaziah rebuked for idolatry. It says, now it came to pass after Amaziah was come from the slaughter of the Edomites, that he brought the gods of the children of Seir and set them up to be gods and bowed himself before them and burned incense to them. So this is how you know you're dealing with Edomites, because it said him and it says Seir. So if we find Edomites here in the plural, this would be up here, right there. Okay. So Ada, Wam, Yum. The same four characters. Ada, Wam, Yum. The yum at the end is the plural. That's what makes it plural. So that's how you say Edomites. That's how you say Edom or Edomites in the Hebrew. Ada, Wam, Yum. That Y is in there. That Y is important, right? Those four characters. Ada, Wam. Let's go back just to, again, Genesis 25:30, the very last word. Ada, Wam. Okay? Because if you didn't know, in the Hebrew for the Ma, it could be two characters that could be written. That's why you see that character of Ma in Deuteronomy. In Genesis 25:30. Right, just to show you again, those four characters, Ada, Wa, Ma, together, Ada, Wam. Second Chronicles 25:14. Same characters, Ada, Wa, Ma, and then Ya, and then another Ma, which Ada, Wam, Yum, which is plural. So that's how you say Edomite and Edomites in Hebrew. So now if we go to Deuteronomy 23, verse 7, when it says thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, which just means thou shalt not shun, right? So now notice that there is no Y here. It's just Da, Ma, Ya. Or if you put it together, Adamai, right? That's not how you say Edom. So when you see it being used in the scriptures here, this is what they put down here. They're putting it as a root of H130, right? They're showing you that in the scriptures in the Old Testament, it'll come up 11 times, and then the word Syria will come up 1 time. So I think, what's the next easiest step? I think let's first just show that really this is talking about Assyrian, right? Assyrian. So let me go back here. If I go back to Genesis 25, if we deal with Rebecca, because this is who it's referring to. It's referring to our forefathers and foremothers, because, Israel was the first Israelite, Jacob. But his mother, Rebecca, was Assyrian, and so was Jacob's wives. They were considered Assyrians too, because they was the daughters of Laban, and Laban was considered Assyrian. So, because that's really the breakdown, we would eventually deal with our own people, the Syrians, right, in our land. We just didn't look at them as if they were, like heathens, because they were our forefathers and our foremothers. That's what this scriptures is talking about, because the Lord is saying, remember, just because they ain't Israelites, they still your kinfolk, because that's literally your foremothers and your uncles and etc. So Deuteronomy 25:20, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Right. So that word Syrian, which is the last word here, is Aramai. Yeah. So you see what they put here? All right, let's see. Aramai. Okay. Partial from Aram. So you see the characters, right? Aramaya. Right. If we go back to the Assyrian, you'll see that the Ra and the Da look similar. Okay. The Ra and the Da look similar. So how do you say Assyrian in the Hebrew are these characters right here? Aramaya. How do you say Edom in the Hebrew? Is Arawam. It's Arawam. See? I'm sorry. Slovakia. Adawam. So notice Edom in the Hebrew contains the Y. But Syrian does not contain the Y. It says Aramaya, referring to the Syrian here regarding who? Our foremothers and our uncles. So Deuteronomy 23:7, because that's the whole point. We figured out how to say Edom and Edomites in the Hebrew is Adawam or Adawam Yum. That Y is in there. And then when you go to Genesis 25 regarding Rebecca, etc., Laban, how do you say Syrian? There is no Y in there. It's just Aramaya. So Deuteronomy 23:7, right, says here, thou shalt not abhor. And then it says Adamaya. But that's not how you say Edomite. But that is how you say what? Syrian. But the D and the Ra, as you can see, the D and the Ra look similar, because that's what it's about. It's a clerical error. So we just proved that the way to say Edom or Edomite in the scripture contains the Y is Adawam. And to say it Edomites, plural, is Adawam Yum. Now to say Syrian in the Hebrew is Aramya. So it's close, right? So when you click on that word there, Deuteronomy 23:7, it'll say Idumya, which is incorrect. when you go to the Strong's definitions and you hit this right here, H726, it'll even tell you down here, right? It says a clerical error for H130, meaning it was they claim it was an accident, but we believe it was intentionally inserted. But it's a clerical error. Why can it be a clerical error? Simply because the da and the ra look similar, right? And here's an example that they provide. 2 Kings 16:6 says, at that time, Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Elath. We're going to deal with this word Elath here, okay? And drave the Jews from Elath, and the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there this day. So what they're saying here is that it shouldn't say Syrians, it should say Edomites. Why should it say Edomites? Because it was a clerical error. The da and the ra look similar, right? Now, before I deal with the Elath to show proof that this is talking about the Edomites, I'm going to show you how just because they put in their H130 doesn't actually line up with the true words of the word Edomites. So let me show you. So I went back to Deuteronomy 23:7. I hit what says Edomites, right? When you look at these entries, notice Genesis 25 isn't on there. Genesis 25 is the first time you see the word Edom. So if this word really was talking about an Edomite, why isn't Genesis 25 listed as the word? Because it's not the same word, right? And even here, they would have what we just read, 2 Chronicles 25:14, regarding the slaughter of the Edomites, and he took their gods. They put H130 there, but that's not the same word. So they'll have H130 as a root for words, but it's not the same word. You see? So again, if this was talking about the word Edomite, why isn't Genesis 25 listed? Because it's not the same word. Because there are times where it could be mistook as Syrian. So now to show proof that this 2 Kings 16:6 is indeed talking about Edomites, which all that will prove is that there are times where it would say Syrian but really should be Edomite, and there are times where it would say Edomite but really should be Syrian. Why? Because the da and the ra is similar, and it could be considered a clerical error. So we have to deal with this. We have to deal with prophecy, and we have to deal with this land known as Elath. Right? So if you type in Elath, this land here, Deuteronomy 2:8 says, and when we pass from our brethren, the children of Esau, which dwelt in Seir, through the way of the plain from Elath and from Ezen-Gabar, we turn and pass away by the wilderness of Moab, right? So, and I also have pictures of the Bible dictionary. All right, this Bible dictionary, right? Page 144, Elath, they even put in here. It means lofty trees. It says a town situated in the head of the Gulf of Abakaba in Edom. It was located very near Ezen-Gabar, Solomon's seaport. The Israelites passed by the area on the way promised to that land. All right. And I also just went to Edomites, right? If you go to Edomites in the Bible dictionary. Well, before I get to that, let me come back to that. So that confirms that Elath is regarding the land of Edom, right? Let's just see what they say here. Okay, they don't say much. So how does this matter when it says, and at that time Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Elath to Syria and drave the Jews from Elath, and the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there unto this day. So how is this relevant? Well, because it's really talking about Edomites. It all goes back to the prophecy where Isaac, when he blessed Esau, he told him, in Deuteronomy 27, verse 39, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above, and by thy sword thou shalt live, and thou shalt serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion that thou shalt, let me read that again. And it shall come to pass that when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. Now, when did that happen? Well, let's first begin with King David. If you go to 2 Samuel 8, verse 14, it says, it's King David now, it says, and he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom, he put garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord Yahweh preserved David whatsoever he went. Right? So he put garrisons in Edom, and a garrison, let me see. And you know it's talking about Edom here because what does it say here? Idawam. It's talking about Edom. Okay. And a garrison is like a pillar, something placed over. So he had them in slavery. Basically, they were tributaries, etc. He had them in slavery, and then there came upon a time where they were then loosed. Why? Because after David passed and King Solomon passed, the children after them did evil, right? And then eventually the Edomites were freed from the clutches of Judah. 2 Kings 14, this is Amaziah, right? Let me type in Eloth again. I thought it was, okay, yeah. So 2 Kings 14, 21, and all the people of Judah took Azariah, which was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. 22, and he built Eloth and restored it to Judah. After that, the king slept with his fathers. So he built Eloth. We know where Eloth is. And he said what? He restored it to Judah. What happened in chapter 16? 2 Kings chapter 16. Later on. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord of Yahweh, his power, like David, his father. So he didn't do what was right. So what eventually happened to him? Right? Verse 5, it says, then Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Ramalchah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Ahaz, but he could not overcome him. At that time, Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Eloth to Syria, and drave the Jews from Eloth, and the Syrians came to Eloth and dwelt there until this day. So what it's really saying is that at that time, Rezin, king of Assyria, recovered Eloth to Edom and drave the Jews from Eloth, and the Edomites came to Eloth and dwelt there until this day. That's what it really, because we just confirmed that Eloth is a part of Edom. David took over Esau, made them tributaries. But when his sons went off, the Syrians, Rezin, the king of Syria, came because they had an allegiance and alliances back then too. And he took Eloth and gave it back to who? The Edomites. And I'm going to show you this commentary. Now, this is just a Bible hub, but even when you read different versions, right? Say like the NIV will say at that time, Rezin, the king of Aram, recovered Eloth for Aram by driving out the people of Judah. Edomites then moved to Elath to have lived there this day. NLT will say, at that time, the king of Edom recovered the town of Elath for Edom and drove out the people of Judah and sent Edomites to live there unto this day. English Standard would say, at the time, Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Elath for Syria and drove the men of Judah from Elath, and the Edomites came to Elath where they dwelt this day. So I guess there are some disagreements on what nationality was Rezin from, because again, the word Adam and Aram, they could mistake it, but they agree here that the Edomites are the ones that went back to Elath to dwell there that day. And then if we go to commentaries on that, all right, so this is Ellicott's commentary. All right, dealing with this part. It says, the words Syria and Edom, Syrians and Edomites are very much alike in Hebrew writing and the Hebrew margin. In many MSS, the LXS, and Vogue read Edomites for Syrians here. If this be correct, we must restore Edom for Syria, as many critics propose. The meaning then becomes this: Rezin emancipated the Edomites from the yoke of Judah, imposed on them by Uzziah, 2 Kings 14, what we read, in order to win their active cooperation against Judah. Right? So that's the point. The point is, you have to go to the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew, to get understanding. That right there proves that when you see the words Edomites and Syrians, it could be reversed. And that was the whole point of me going into the whole Syria and Elath. That was the whole point, proving that Elath had connections to the Edomites. And in the Bible dictionary, when you go to Edomites, okay, it even tells you right here, Judah lost Edom in the reign of Jehoram when she revolted against him in 847 BC. About 50 years later, Amaziah, king of Judah, inflicted a severe defeat on the Edomites. About 735 BC, Rezin, the king of Assyria, at war with Judah, captured Elath and drove the Jews out. See, now, so why is this even in the caption of the Edomites? Because that land Elath belonged to Edom. And when Isaac told Esau that eventually he would break the yoke, that's when that happened. That's the prophecy of when that happened. So you see, it all ties together. So the bottom line is, all right, in the Hebrew, the word for Edom is Idawam, and Edomites is Idawam Yum. The word for Syrian is Aramai. So how does this have connection with Deuteronomy 23:7? Well, first of all, if it was really saying Edomite, it would have said Arawam. It doesn't say that. It says Idumya. But since you know that the Da and the Ra can be clerical errors, a mistake for a clerical error because they look the same, then you understand the affiliation with Syrians, our foremothers and uncles, with Jacob, right? Then you can understand that that's talking about Syrians. It's not talking about Edomites as a clerical error because the Da and the Ra look similar. That's what it's talking about. Okay? That's not talking about actual Edomite. And I'm going to tell you something. Bishop Nathaniel knows that. But he's being deceptive. So for the umpteenth time, Deuteronomy 23:7, for one, is not saying hate. Abhor does not hate. It means to shun. Edomite is not actually there, because that's not how you say Edom in the Hebrew. But it is very similar to how you say Aram in the Hebrew, because that's what it's talking about, is a clerical error. So it's talking about thou shalt not abhor a Syrian, for he is thy brother. Why is that? Because literally that was our foremothers and our uncles. They were still kinfolk. They just weren't Israelites. And then it says, thou shalt not shun an Egyptian because I was a stranger in this land. Now, I'll deal with the stranger part where he mentioned you shall treat a stranger as yourself, not talking about that. Okay. In the Old Testament, you have 4 words for the word stranger. One can mean your own tribe. Another one can mean a different tribe. Another word could just simply mean a traveler, one who travels, right? And he doesn't have any rights. And then the last one being an actual other nation. But like I said, it's 4 different words in the Old Testament. That's why you have to go into the word to get the understanding. And that word in Leviticus 19 that he read is a gar. And gar is an Israelite who's a traveler. It's not talking about an actual heathen. And I'll explain that. But that is why these guys have just completely went back to their own vomit. They went back to Christianity. At one point they were cleansed, but then a little leaven leavened the whole lump. And now the doctrine they teach is basically Christianity. And typically what comes next is that all nations can be saved. You got to remember, their hell doctrine that they teach is reserved only for Israelites. Is more mercy showed to the other nations than it is their own people. That's showing you that they're compromised and they literally have hatred for their own brother. You know, to them, they say the Lord is more angry at the fact that you Israelites, at you Israelites, and he's got a special place for you to go burn forever. But he's not really that mad with the Edomites, even though the scriptures literally tell you that if the days weren't shortened, no flesh would be saved. Literally, the Lord has to intervene because his creation known as earth and life, which the earth and life is known to reproduce itself, to live. He's coming to stop that. And if he didn't if he didn't get off his throne to come down here, he would literally destroy the very creation that the Lord labored much to make. But he's not that mad at them. But he is more mad at his own people because they ain't got fringes on their shirts. This is what they teach. And that's because James chapter 2 says you have respected persons, thus they become judges of evil thoughts. They're basically thinking like a heathen. And that's because they're compromised by a heathen. They're compromised by the Edomites because they took his bag. Took the bag, man. But anyway, with that, say shalom.